is a phrase. 5 words. Most Catholics say it every day. Some say it so often it has become part of the background. Something the mouth forms without the mind fully arriving. A breath between other prayers. A habit so ingrained it has become nearly invisible. Padre Pio said it, and a demonic presence that had been assaulting him for hours vanished from his cell. I want to tell you why those are 2 completely different acts, and I want to show you, tonight, before you turn off the light, how to make sure yours is the second kind. My name is Raymond. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology at a high school in northern Kentucky. When I retired 3 years ago, I went back to the primary sources. Not the devotional summaries or the curated selections that appear in parish booklets, but the actual letters. Padre Pio's Epistolario, the documented frameworks of the Church's most experienced exorcists, the kind of material that does not end up in high school religion textbooks. What I found was that I had been teaching a simplified version of something far more precise. I am not talking about doctrine. I am talking about a phrase I had said thousands of times in 35 years without fully understanding what it was doing, or, more exactly, what it could be doing and what was required to make it do it. Because there is a difference between saying this phrase as a habit and saying it as what it actually is, and the difference is not minor. It is not about sincerity or devotion or the depth of your feeling. It is about something more structural than that. Something that the Church's active exorcists document consistently from the other side of the rite. And something that Padre Pio understood from the inside of 50 years of combat. That is what tonight is about. Before I name the phrase and show you what it does, I need to name something else first. Because the darkness this phrase drives out does not always arrive the way people imagine. It does not always appear as a dramatic manifestation at 3 in the morning. It does not always announce itself through obvious signs, visions, sounds, the kind of phenomena that makes a person call their pastor at midnight. More often, far more often, it arrives quietly. It arrives as persistent worry that returns to the same thought at 2 a.m. no matter how many times you have dismissed it, prayed against it, confessed it, and told yourself to stop. It arrives as a heaviness you cannot explain, a weight in the chest that comes and goes without obvious cause, as intrusive thoughts, dark, repetitive, sometimes disturbing, that you have fought with every spiritual resource you know to use, and they keep returning. It arrives as a flatness in prayer, the sense that your words are not reaching anything, that you are maintaining a devotional practice rather than contacting the living God. Think about your own life for a moment, not your beliefs, not your theological convictions, your actual experience in the hours when the ordinary noise of the day stops. Is there something there that you have not been able to name? Something that Orthodox prayer has not fully addressed? Padre Pio would not have been surprised by that question. He named this thing with a directness I did not find in any textbook during 35 years of teaching. In his spiritual direction, Letters in the Epistolario, Volume 3, the collection of his correspondence with his spiritual children, he wrote something I have returned to many times since I first read it in retirement. Worry is the rust of the soul. It consumes the soul more than good works build it up. He was not describing a personality trait. He was not diagnosing anxiety as a natural human condition to be managed with better coping strategies. He was naming an attack, a specific, patient, deliberate attack by an enemy who knows what a divided soul looks like and knows how to keep it divided. Because a divided soul, a soul still holding something in its own hands, still managing its own fear rather than surrendering it, still refusing at some level to fully place its claim in God's hands, is a soul with a foothold available. That is what this phrase closes. And understanding how it closes, it changes everything about how you use it. Let me show you the evidence before I show you the mechanism. because the mechanism only carries its full weight when you have seen the pattern it reflects. In the Epistolario, Volume 1, Padre Pio's letters to his spiritual director, Padre Agostino Daniele, written between 1910 and 1915, there is a body of correspondence that his biographers have studied with extraordinary care. The nocturnal attacks at San Giovanni Rotondo. These were not metaphorical accounts. The brothers who slept in cells adjacent to Padre Pio heard the disturbances and found the physical evidence in the mornings. Furniture displaced, marks on his body that no accident could explain. He described these encounters in his letters with the precision of a soldier filing field reports from active combat. He wrote to Padre Agostino in 1912, "These devils don't stop striking me, even making me fall down from the bed. They even tear off my shirt to beat me." This documentation stands across multiple witnesses, cross-referenced during the beatification process. The testimony is solid. What matters most for what I am about to tell you, what Father Alessio Parente, Padre Pio's biographer, documented specifically in his work, Send Me Your Guardian Angel, was the consistency of Padre Pio's response pattern. He did not respond to demonic assault with lengthy formal prayers or elaborate rites. He responded with an invocation, short, precise, immediate. Father Parente documented a 3-beat pattern that appears consistently across the accounts, an act of humility, acknowledging before God that the strength was not his own, a prayer of abandonment, placing himself entirely in God's hands, and then the invocation of Christ's name. Only by invoking Jesus' name did the demon vanish. Not after an extended period of prayer, not after a formal exorcism rite. The invocation of Christ's name, made in the posture of humility and abandonment, and the presence left. This is not unique to Padre Pio. It is the pattern of the early church. In the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 16, verse 18, Paul encountered a slave girl oppressed by a divining spirit. He did not conduct an elaborate ceremony. He said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." The spirit left that very hour. Justin Martyr, writing in the 2nd century, documented that ordinary Christians, not only priests or trained exorcists, were driving out demonic presence through brief invocations of Christ's name. Tertullian documented the same. Origen described it as one of the most widely observable phenomena of the early Christian community. The authority was not in the complexity or the length of the prayer. It was in the name and in the standing of the soul invoking it. And Christ himself established the terms plainly in Mark, chapter 16. "In my name, they will drive out demons." The phrase does not need to be long. It needs to be his name, invoked by a baptized soul, not in serious unconfessed sin, and invoked with what the tradition calls faith. But here is where most explanations stop short. Because faith, in common Catholic understanding, tends to be treated as a feeling, the warmth of conviction, the interior certainty that prayer is reaching something. And when the feeling is absent, people doubt whether their faith is sufficient. That is the wrong framework. And I did not find the right one until I encountered the exorcist documentation that explains precisely what Padre Pio was doing in his cell. There is another source that belongs in this picture, and understanding where the phrase came from changes how you hear it. Across Europe from San Giovanni Rotondo in Krakow, Poland, in the year 1931, a young religious sister named Faustina Kowalska began writing a diary of private revelations. She documented encounters with Christ in which he communicated what he called his mercy for the world, the Divine Mercy devotion. He asked her to have an image painted of him. The image that now hangs in Catholic parishes around the world, with rays of light flowing from his heart and his hand extended in blessing. At the base of that image are 5 words: "Jesus, I trust in you." Padre Pio and Senior Faustina were contemporaries. He was enduring his nocturnal combat at San Giovanni Rotondo, Through the same years, she was writing her diary in Poland between 1931 and 1938. They never met. They never corresponded directly. But what they were each living, he in combat, she in revelation, was the same theological reality approached from two different positions. He was discovering from the inside of spiritual warfare what she was receiving in mystical revelation. Both arrived at the same 5 words. Christ identified this act of trust in Faustina's documented diary as the key that opens his mercy to a soul. Not a request for mercy, not a plea asking God to extend something he might otherwise withhold. A declaration that places the soul in the position to receive what is already fully present and awaiting that reception. His mercy is not the variable. The soul's orientation is the variable. Fear, the worry that holds the future in its own hands, the anxiety that cannot release its claim, is what closes the soul off from what is already available. Jesus, I trust in you, reverses that orientation. It places the claim where it belongs and opens the soul to what the fear had been blocking. And when the soul is open to that, when the transfer has been made, there is no divided ground left for anything else to occupy. I put together a guide for exactly this. The practical application of this phrase as a spiritual seal, and how it connects to the full protection of your home and family. It is called Seal Your Home. It is in the description. What I am about to explain is the first step in that guide, the personal seal, the interior act, before any of the other steps can fully take hold. But stay with me through the mechanism first. The steps will make much more sense when you understand what they are doing. Chad Ripperger, a priest with decades of documented experience in the Church's traditional rite of exorcism, whose work is drawn from his lectures and his book Dominion, teaches something about the legal structure of spiritual warfare that does not appear in most Catholic formation. The demonic operates according to legal rights. A legal right is a point of access, something in the soul's orientation that gives the enemy standing to be present. The obvious ones are serious, unconfessed sin and deliberate involvement in occult practices. But Ripperger identifies something that is far more common and far less recognized. Fear, chronic anxiety, persistent worry, the circular thought that returns to the same point and will not release. These are not merely psychological inconveniences to be managed with better habits. Fear in Ripperger's framework, and this is not sentiment, this is his documented clinical pastoral observation from active exorcism ministry, represents a soul that has not fully transferred its claim to God. A soul still trying to hold something in its own hands, still unable to fully say, "This belongs to you." The outcome, the future, the thing I am afraid of, I am not managing it anymore. It is yours. That divided orientation is a foothold, not because the person intends to give the enemy access. They do not. But a soul that has fully surrendered its claim is structured differently in the spiritual realm than a soul that has not. The undivided soul has claimed its ground. The divided soul has left territory available. This is why Padre Pio called worry an attack rather than a personality trait. He had learned from experience what the divided soul looks like from the outside, from the perspective of what finds the opening and stays. Now, what does the phrase do to that foothold? Ripperger is theologically precise about the mechanism. The phrase is not a petition. It is not a request. It is not a hope. It is a declarative, present tense, an act of the will stating its current orientation as a fact. I trust in you. Not, help me trust more. Not, I hope to be able to trust you eventually. Not, I believe I should trust you when I am feeling better. I trust in you. In Thomistic theology, in what Aquinas establishes in his treatment of the virtue of hope and the act of trust. Fiducia. Trust is an act of the will directed toward God as the soul's supreme good and sufficient end. When the will makes that act genuinely, it is by definition withdrawing from every competing attachment, including the attachment to the outcome it has been managing in its own hands, including the attachment to fear itself. A volitional act of trust, made with the will, not derived from an emotion, not conditioned on feeling a certain way, interrupts the divided orientation at its structural root. The soul is no longer holding the claim. The claim has been transferred, and when the claim is transferred, the ground on which the enemy was standing ceases to exist, not gradually, over time, through sustained effort. The legal right disappears at the moment the transfer is made with full volitional intent. Ripperger also documents something from his exorcism sessions that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I first encountered it. When compelled to speak truthfully under the full juridical authority of the Church's formal right, when the priest, operating under the authority of Christ delegated through the bishop, commands the demon to answer, there are documented moments when the demon is forced to reveal what it cannot withstand. Demons have described the name of Jesus Christ, invoked by a soul with genuine faith, as unbearable. Not difficult, not unpleasant, unbearable. The reason is ontological, not emotional, not psychological. Ontological. Christ's name carries his authority, and that authority was established not as a theological claim, but as a completed historical act. The crucifixion, the resurrection, the paschal mystery, which settled the question of ultimate sovereignty once and for all, and cannot be revisited or negotiated. When you say, Jesus, I trust in you, you are invoking both his name and the completed work simultaneously. You are calling on the authority of the one who already won, not the one who might win eventually. And you are placing yourself, by act of will, under that authority and no other. There is no legal standing for darkness in that declaration. But, and this is the part I want you to hold carefully, the declaration only operates that way when the soul is making a decision, not reciting a habit. This is the distinction Ripperger draws in his public lectures with a clarity I wish I had encountered 30 years earlier. He says, demons distinguish between vocal prayer and volitional prayer. They are not the same thing. Vocal prayer is sound. Words sincerely spoken, perhaps from years of faithful habit, without the engagement of the will in a decisive act at this specific moment. Volitional prayer is the soul making a choice. Now, present tense, with the will engaged and the transfer intended. A soul that has decided to trust, Ripperger teaches, is different from a soul that is asking God to make it trust. The person who says, Jesus, I trust in you every morning as part of a devotional habit built over decades, faithfully, sincerely, without missing a day, is doing something real. It is not nothing. But if the soul is maintaining a practice rather than making a decision each time, if the phrase has become part of the rhythm of prayer without the will actively choosing to transfer its claim in this specific moment, the legal mechanism is not fully activated. The person who says the same 5 words at the exact moment the darkness arrives, at 2 a.m., at the onset of the intrusive thought, at the first heaviness of the evening, and says it as a deliberate act of will. Right now, in this moment, I am choosing this. I am not asking for a feeling. I am making a decision about who owns the ground of my life. That soul is doing something categorically different, and the darkness feels the difference immediately. And that's when I realized something I should have understood much earlier in my life. Several years after Margaret passed, when I had more time to sit with these questions and more honesty about what I had not understood in 35 years of teaching, A young woman came to speak with me after Sunday Mass. She had been one of my students years before. She was in her mid-20s now. Devout and serious. The kind of Catholic who goes to confession regularly and genuinely examines her conscience. She attended Mass faithfully. She prayed the rosary. She used holy water by every measure of ordinary Catholic practice. She was doing everything right. And she was being slowly worn down. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, persistent, exhausting way. Intrusive thoughts that came especially at night. A heaviness that settled in once the lights went out, that no amount of prayer seemed to interrupt. A sense of something nearby she could not name. She had tried novenas, additional devotions, extended periods of prayer before bed. She was doing more, not less, and none of it was resolving the underlying pressure. She came to me because she had run out of things to try. I gave her one instruction. Not a new devotion, not a longer prayer routine, not a sacramental she was not already using. I told her to say, "Jesus, I trust in you," 3 times before she turned off the light each night. Not as a routine addition to her evening prayers. Not as a formula she was hoping would function as a kind of spiritual shield. As a decision, as a deliberate act of will. Saying to God, I am choosing, right now, not as a wish, but as a present tense fact, to place the ground of my life in your hands. Whatever claim I have been holding through fear, through worry, through the part of me that has been trying to manage my own future instead of surrendering it, I am transferring that claim right now. To you, not to myself, not to the darkness. To you. She came back 3 weeks later. She said, "It's like the darkness doesn't have permission to stay anymore." She was not sure what had changed structurally. She said the thoughts still came sometimes, but they did not stay. They arrived and found nowhere to land and passed through. The underlying pressure that had been constant for months had lifted. I told her, "You did not change how you felt. You changed your legal standing in the spiritual realm. You revoked the permission that the divided, anxious orientation had been granting without your knowledge. That is what that phrase does when it is used as what it actually is. Now let me give you the method, exactly what Padre Pio's documented pattern looks like when you translate it into what you can do tonight. This is not a formula to be performed. It is a decision to be made. And the decision must be made consciously, because the conscious engagement of the will is what activates the transfer. Step 1. Choose a moment of stillness. Before sleep is the most important window. The moment Padre Pio understood well from 50 years of experience, when the will is beginning to withdraw and the imagination opens to receive whatever finds it first. But you can do this at any moment the pressure arrives. The 2 a.m. worry, the intrusive thought in the middle of the afternoon, the evening heaviness that comes without announcement. Wherever the darkness meets you, that is the moment to use it. Step 2. Sit or stand upright. Not for ceremony. Your posture signals to your soul that you are making a decision, not passively receiving an impression. You are in an active state. You are the agent of this act, not the subject of what is pressing against you. Step 3. Make the sign of the cross. Slowly, deliberately. Mark yourself as belonging to the Trinity. Place yourself under that authority before you make the declaration. This is the act of humility in Padre Pio's 3-beat pattern. The acknowledgement that what follows is not your power, but a claim made in the name of the one whose authority is already established and not in question. Step 4. Say these words 3 times. Out loud if possible. In a calm, certain voice. Not frantic, not pleading, not loud and strained, calm and certain. The voice of someone declaring something they already know to be true, not hoping it might become true. Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. Step 5. On the third repetition, stop. Hold a moment of silence. Let the declaration settle. Do not rush past it to check whether you feel different. The act of the will has occurred. The transfer has been made. Your feelings are not the measure of the declaration's effect. The will has acted. That is what counts in the spiritual realm. Step 6. If the darkness returns, say it again. Not in desperation, not in the panic of repetition as though you are unsure whether it worked. As someone enforcing a verdict that has already been declared. Because that is precisely what you are doing. The standing has been established. You are not requesting a new outcome. You are insisting on the one that already stands. Step 7. Optional, but especially useful for those experiencing persistent or recurring pressure. Before you say the phrase, add one sentence. I renounce any fear or worry I have held on to that gave the enemy permission in my life. This names the specific legal right most commonly exploited, the anxious, divided soul, the claim held back from God, and revokes it explicitly, by name. Then follow immediately with the declaration. An explicit revocation followed by an explicit transfer leaves the enemy without a legal response. The ground is claimed by the authority of the one whose claim over it was established before anything else existed. Everything I just described, the step-by-step protocol for this personal seal, the full framework for extending this protection to your home and family, the prayers and sacramentals and room-by-room method that follow from this foundation. I compiled it all in a guide called Seal Your Home. It is in the description. You can start with this phrase tonight. Everything in the guide follows from this first step. If you want the complete system, that is where it begins. I want to close with something different from how I usually close. Most of what I share on this channel is difficult. It is the kind of truth that carries weight and asks something of the person who hears it. This one is different. Because the weapon is not new, you have probably already said it. Perhaps this morning, at the end of your rosary, perhaps in front of the Divine Mercy image on your wall, perhaps quietly, almost without thinking, in the middle of some other prayer. You have been holding the weapon. The question is whether you have been holding it or using it. Holding it is the habit. Good, real, not nothing, but the will not fully engaged in the act of transfer in each specific moment. Using it is the decision, the act of will that says, not as decoration, not as comfort, not as a phrase that concludes a decade of the rosary, but as a declaration, as a legal transfer, as a present tense statement of where the ground of my life is placed. Padre Pio's pattern across 50 years of the most extreme documented spiritual combat any modern saint endured was never complicated. He did not have elaborate strategies for the darkness that came to his cell at night. He had short, precise, volitional invocations. He invoked the name. He made the abandonment. He left no ground unclaimed, and he left those same instructions for every soul he directed. For parents troubled by their children's suffering, for people plagued by worry and intrusive thoughts, for souls who felt the oppression and did not know how to name it or address it. He wrote it plainly once, in 5 words that are also a complete theology. Pray, hope, and don't worry. Surrender your claim. Place it in his hands. Trust. Not as a feeling, not as something you are working toward, but as a decision about who owns your life. That is what those 5 words are. And now you know what they do. Take this with you tonight, before you turn off the light, in the stillness that comes before sleep. or the next moment the pressure arrives. The thought that circles, the heaviness that settles in, the fear that has no name but will not release. Say it 3 times, slowly, with full intent of will, not as a wish, not as a comfort phrase you are hoping will shift your emotional state, as a declaration, as a legal transfer, as someone who has decided tonight, in full awareness, that the ground of their life belongs to Christ and to no other power. Watch what happens. God bless you, and stay vigilant.